Hello and welcome to another episode of Talksicology, brought to you by Recovery Unplugged. Here at Talksicology, we talk all things addiction, recovery, and mental health. Tonight's guest, stigmatic language researcher, Austin McNeil Brown. I'm your co-host, Jason Cabello, and as always, your host and mine, Joseph Gorordo.
Stigmatic language researcher. That's a title.
This is exciting. I can't wait for this. It's going to be cool.
You know what it made me just think of? Do you remember that mid-90s film Stigmata?
Yes.
Yeah. It had a great Chumbawamba song on the soundtrack.
I didn't know there was a great Chumbawamba song. I'll have to check it out.
Listen. If you've never delved into Chumbawamba beyond Tub Thumper, you're missing out, buddy.
Am I? Okay, I'll check it out. I mean, they're English. I'm an Anglophile, right? They're English. Okay,
yes,
so I'll check
English.
It out. They
actually consider themselves to be an anarcho-punk music collective.
All right, because there was this rumor going around that they used to be the band Crass. If you know Crass.
Yeah.
There was a rumor going around that I fell for. I fell for the big lie. That they used to be members of Crass that turned into Chumbawamba, but that was debunked. I don't know how recent, but I just found out recently, so I'll say that it was recently debunked. I'm sure you could just have looked at the album sleeve and said, no, none of these guys were in Crass, but
they have different names.
I'm lazy.
Well, man, it's good to see you. And welcome to all our guests. Welcome to Talksicology, all our viewers out there. Hi, Allison. How are you today?
Hang in there.
We missed you last week. Last week was the first week we did not have Talksicology since we started this.
27 weeks has it been? 28 something. Yeah, 28 weeks. And we all had the day off. But it was weird. It was like, because you feel your week has feelings like the day, the night, and then it's always just like the day before Friday. I know it because I got the podcast. It's garbage day. It's all these things, and then I didn't take out the garbage in time. Everything was thrown off. So I'm glad to be back.
Oh, Greg is pointing out to us that he did not have the day off. He ran. He ran. Did you watch? I went back and watched. So last week, those of y'all who weren't with us, we didn't have Talksicology, but we did have a special kind of guest event where Carl Bremer and Ian Jackson from Nashville did sort of a live family program session. And it was really good.
Yeah, I checked in for a couple minutes, but I was driving, so I couldn't keep my Facebook on.
Yeah.
But no, I mean anything Ian and or Carl respectively is that's some good stuff. Two powerhouses there in the recovery field.
Yeah. So I wanted to give you an update on my personal life here, Jason.
Please do.
The last episode we did was the Father's Day episode.
Right,
which was great. And last week I went on vacation. It was the first time I was ever going on a trip for my birthday, and I really thought that a birthday alone with my wife, without my children, on a cruise ship was going to be heaven. And the reality is I had a great time.
Yeah.
But the day of my birthday, I was profoundly sad to not be with my
you missed
children.
your kids.
I did. I did. I messed up. I'm never going to do that again.
You're never going to miss your kids again. Okay, you heard it here first, folks.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, I'm going to miss them. I'm just never going to not be with them on my birthday.
Okay, all right. I didn't know which direction you were going with that, but no, you have great kids. So I mean, I could see why. You know what I mean? I miss your kids.
Yeah.
No, but it's.
What did you do with your Thursday night off?
Nothing. We went out. We got some food, and then we came home. Gabby and I, my partner, and we just chilled. We're still we're in the new house, and we're still it's been about a month, but we both work quite a bit, so we're unpacking slowly. We just got a nice new sofa, so we get to just it's huge, and it's a big sectional, mid-century modular, so we get to put it in different configurations, see what's comfy, and then I think we've got it figured out. We cracked the code.
You cracked the code
I
on how
believe
the
so.
couch should go.
I think so. We'll keep you
I
posted.
understand those challenges.
It's riveting.
Oh, we got a gentleman in the comments, Mr. Michael Scutaro. If you need a contractor, give him a call. Michael,
There you
you know
go.
what?
I
I'm
appreciate
assuming
the
Michael's
hustle.
Michael. I'm assuming you're in recovery, and we love supporting recovery-based businesses. So, yeah, give Michael a call if you need a contractor. Everybody,
Where? You got to tell. I mean, you're just going to get calls from all
Yeah,
over the country. Where are you licensed and bonded?
yeah. He
He'll
says
build
he'll build
anything.
anything.
Oh, podcast studio.
You know, this actually brings up a good point. There's a recovery researcher guy. I guess you could call him a recovery researcher. A guy named William White. Right, have you ever heard of this guy?
I don't believe so. Tell me more, maybe. If
Yeah. So William White, he's published a lot of papers and analysis on recovery and different aspects of recovery, and he talks about things like I forget the real name for it, but like basically like a recovery capital scale, like how invested are you in your recovery, and some
oh,
cool stuff. But one of the things that he talks about is the necessity to build a recovery economy. And so what he talks about with that is that very often individuals who are coming into recovery are less than ideal employees,
right.
not because of who they are, but because of their past, a record, the things that we do when we're using, right? And so he talks about how, the recovery community as a whole should take steps towards ensuring that they support recovery oriented businesses,
Yeah.
get guys in recovery to help you move, get guys in recovery to cut your grass, get guys in recovery to paint your house, do your taxes,
I
whatever.
I see a lot of that in Austin, which in Florida it was like the 12-step community was great, and I thrived on that. But here in Austin, I've noticed a lot of the recovery community. No matter where no matter how you get your recovery, these people who are business owners and will hire people new in recovery and give them chances. So I am all for that.
Yeah. It's wild. I feel like Austin is kind of becoming a recovery town where like you can't go anywhere without running into somebody who's in
Right.
the rooms. I went to the gym yesterday with a friend of the show, Ryan Spencer. And as we were walking through the gym, I see this guy that I've never seen before in my life, and he's hitting a vape right there in the middle of the gym.
And you knew it.
And I was like, this motherfucker's in recovery.
Yeah.
Nobody else would be. And sure enough, about 5 minutes later, he comes over, Ryan Spencer, how you doing, buddy? And I was like, I knew it.
Yeah.
No judgment, though. I used to be that guy who would vape absolutely anywhere.
Yeah. Okay.
I vaped in the Capitol building.
I'm glad you worked on that. I'm an anti-vapor.
Well, anyway, unless you've got anything you'd like to discuss.
No, I am really, really excited to hear about what our guest has to say. This is
Yes. And now I believe in the intro we said
it's a misnomer, wasn't it?
stigmatic linguist expert, but we were just informed before the show that the best way to refer to our guest is recovery scientist, which we should have thought of that.
We should have, or
Yeah.
we're just a bunch of whatever.
Yeah.
Slackers.
But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, today's guest, recovery scientist Austin McNeil Brown, MSW/PhD candidate. Right? Did I say that correctly? PhD
Yes.
part, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I have some superpowers too, but I don't list them usually.
Ooh, what kind of superpowers?
I can eat a whole pizza.
Holy shit, that's incredible.
Nice.
Let's hear more about that.
No, you know what that makes me think of? There's this. I guess it's like a thought experiment. But you ask people, if they'd rather have the power of flight or the power of invisibility, and the idea behind that is that like all the things you could do with flight are generally good things. things, but all the things that you would do with invisibility are kind of sketchy.
Yeah, that's a good. I've never thought of that, but that's true.
Yeah, but anyway, Austin, welcome to the show. And as we do on this show, we're gonna start things off, break the ice a little bit by going over to our tried and true spinning wheel of songs. If Greg can hit there we go. Let's go. Oh, no song?
Oh, my favorite part of the show.
Greg
Next
just
time.
got back from vacation. He's slipping.
Yeah, he's sunburned.
All right. Okay. A song that makes me feel relaxed. I got this one, you guys. There is a song by a band called Marconi Union. It is called Sleep, and it is 8 hours long. And it is actually scientifically proven to be the most relaxing song in existence. And that's what I'm going with.
Wow. Okay. I'm gonna go with mine. Would be Tin Cans and Twine by Tortoise. Just very. If you've ever listened to Tortoise, it's very just mellow, soundscapey stuff. And
Like My Bloody Valentine kind of stuff.
no, just very mellow. Lots of like xylophones and just a good relaxing time.
Love it.
Yeah,
Love
I'm
it.
gonna agree with Maggie. Anything from Enya or this could sound really lame, but like anything by Yanni.
Yanni, live at the Acropolis. Yeah.
Wow.
Oh man,
Sort
that
of
was
dating
that was a
myself.
time period. That was a time period, was it? I mean, like remember the mid '90s when they had the what was it called?
Now that's
Pure
music stuff.
No, Pure Moods, and
Yeah.
it was like Enya and Yanni and like all those weird mellow '90s pop hits.
Yeah, I think it's probably Yanni's mustache that really makes me feel so relaxed.
That thing is hypnotizing.
Yeah.
What is it about
Like
a
a lava
robust
lamp.
mustache that makes you feel comfortable, Austin? Let's get into the deep
Oh
questions.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's the mustache and the long hair combined.
Yeah, yeah.
And then he's playing the piano and very enthusiastic.
Some Doug Henning magic tricks,
Yeah.
So, Austin, for our viewers at home, myself and Austin, we have known each other just about 14 years now.
Yep.
Austin was at the very beginning of my recovery journey. We were roommates at a sober house in Kerrville, Texas, in 2008.
Yep.
So I know a little bit about your story, and I spoiled a little bit of it to Jason earlier, just the high points, the good stuff.
The Johnny Cash shirt.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep. Which I still have.
You still have that same Johnny Cash shirt?
Yeah, and of course I have lots of pearl snaps growing up in Texas.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So for the listeners at home, he had a. Joseph was telling me that when he came into treatment, he just had one T-shirt, and that was a Johnny Cash shirt. So.
Yep. Yeah, the trash bag was close, and I had some gator skin boots that were the
boots. Possession. You had some real nice boots.
Yeah, it was the only thing I had of any value.
Another friend of ours who sadly lost his battle with addiction, a guy named Ian. We called him Big Ian because he was tall, and we were very creative with the nicknames. He used to refer to Austin as Austin, the outlaw poet.
That's pretty cool. That's a very Texan thing. What was your nickname, Joseph?
Oh, Austin, do you remember my nickname?
No.
So in Kerrville, there was two Josephs at the time I was in Kerrville. There was Gay Joseph and Joseph with the hat. Yeah. Joseph with the hat, because I rocked the fedora for like the first 18 months of my recovery.
The whole Jason Mraz thing going.
Oh, Lord.
Very much so. No beard, shaggy hair, the fedora, much skinnier, and an acoustic guitar for the ladies.
We're all glad you grew out of that phase, Joseph.
Nobody wants to hear "I'm yours." But Austin, there's the stuff we're going to talk about with you today is really fascinating. I want to make sure that we get to that. But just like in the many rooms of recovery, we like to qualify a little bit. So tell us about just the condensed version of kind of your recovery journey. What kind of recovery do you practice today? Is it the same as what you did when you first walked in the rooms? Just give us a little rundown on that side of things.
Yeah. So when you and I met, that was probably my fourth time through treatment out in the hill country.
I knew it
And
wasn't the first. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and I was really fortunate to just get in with some people that were really doing some work, and I had a lot of work to do, and so I hung around Kerrville for I took my time, but I was friends with a lot of younger guys, and they were kind of in the middle of like college age, and they were all going back to school, and
That's right. You were like a grown up, and we were like
yeah,
children.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I was working at the psych ward, and it was really interesting work doing direct care for involuntary patients,
It was a
and
short commute too.
yeah, yeah, and I got interested in psychology, and I had it was kind of a combination of factors. I had some friends that cornered me, and they were like, you're a pretty smart guy. You should probably think about going back to school. And at the same time, my supervisor out there had cornered me and said, and what are you doing exactly with your life? Because you seem pretty good at this, and you seem to understand the clients really well. How come you've never finished school? And so that all kind of conspired at the same time, and so I ended up going out to Texas Tech, getting into Texas Tech thanks to the collegiate recovery program out there. I had a
Guns
1.7
up.
GPA. Yeah.
Is that guns? That's the thing, right? Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I wouldn't have been able to get back into college without collegiate recovery. So I owe a lot to collegiate recovery, and um, so I got back into school, and I went from a 1.7 GPA to making the dean's list or making the president's
Wow.
list. So I had a 4.0 my first semester.
Let me ask you
And
a question with that. Going back to school in the collegiate recovery program, like how you know, I'm assuming there was some fear there, being kind of like the older guy, which like, I mean, older then was like you were in your 30s, right?
yep, yep.
Like what was that like? Kind of, was that humbling? Was it walking through some fear? Like, what was going on with you in that decision to say, like, you know what, I'm going back to college, I'm doing this?
Well, I had taken college off of the horizon of possibilities for myself, and so I was kind of caught up in kind of the exuberance of like my peers who are all much younger, and so there was a lot of excitement. I went out there for Paul's wedding actually,
Yeah.
and I remember we went to the wedding out there, and all of
Yeah.
the
I have
students from the
video. I
collegiate
have video of
recovery.
all our New Year's resolutions from that wedding.
Yep. Yeah. So all those students that I met that night were the ones that really convinced me to go back to school. Coming back, it was how it is in early recovery. I mean, I didn't feel more than 17 years old inside
Yeah.
anyway. I mean, I wasn't very mature. I could barely take care of myself. So I was probably emotionally on the same level as everybody. Um, but within a pretty short time, I mean, I think going back to school really contributed a lot to um, my recovery trajectory in ways that I would not have anticipated. So, education really supporting my recovery in ways where I had a community that was also intellectually stimulating, and I was engaged in something that was long term. Um, so, I mean, it wasn't until the end that I really was aware of my age, to be quite honest.
Uh-huh.
I lived in a little garage apartment across the street from campus. I walked to the football games. I went to every single football game. All my friends, even to this day, most of them are much younger than me. So, um, you know, there was some fear, but I pretty quickly I became kind of being older and being well read before I went back to school. I was able to help younger students out who were struggling, and I did really well. So it was helping other students get excited about things that maybe at 23 or 24 years old you're not really excited about.
Yeah.
But also the collegiate recovery community is a lot of non-traditional students, so the average
Mhm.
age is about 27. So I wasn't that much older.
Yeah. You know
Uh,
what's weird as you're talking, uh, I think I've talked about it on the show before how like I'm 38, I'm not that old, but like most of the guys that I work with, a lot of the people that I talk to on a daily basis are much younger than me, and not much younger than me, but they're in their early 30s. And I've been a dad for 12 years, and I've been married for 11 years, and sober for 14 years, to where like I kind of feel a little bit of like what you were just talking about, like sort of like an elder statesman kind of thing, as much as I hate to say it, because they're all just now getting married, starting families, and
yeah, I had 20 years over most of the people that I went to treatment with, and
That's right, yeah.
I'm creeping up on 50, and half the people that I hang out with are, I skate all day and hang out with a bunch of younger guys, but then towards the end of the day, that's when the age really starts to. I'm like, oh yeah, that's
9 o'clock, y'all.
Oh, I'm way in bed by 9.
So I have another question about the college thing, Austin. So where we sobered up in Kerrville, very old school big book, right? Alcoholic, addict, spiritual principles, fuck you, do service work, very the most Bible Belt of the Bible Belt big book, thumper club.
Yep.
Now I know in the collegiate research academic world, right, the view of recovery is much broader than that. Was that a challenge for you to kind of what's the word I'm looking for, to rectify between the two, that like some of that dissonance?
Yeah, so the kind of the disparity between like what intellectuals and science says about addiction and things like that. So the I had a psychology major with a minor in addiction studies, so I took all the classes as well. So I was sitting in classes and reading textbooks and studying research that didn't necessarily line up with my personal experience. And that was challenging in a couple of different ways. I think part of it was, one of the things that really inspired me to become a recovery scientist was that I would read textbooks and I would think, this is partly really true, but partly way off base. And it felt like all these different theories, felt like kind of odd fitting shirts when it came to my own experience. And so one of the things that I recognized pretty early on, that what was missing from most of the research was the notion of personal experience and qualitative information about what it was like to be in recovery, what motivated recovery. And then, of course, I took like the psychology of religion and spirituality, which was a fascinating class. And it really helped me to pin down kind of the more esoteric elements of the psychology of recovery in ways that could be translated in and amongst scholars and in an academic setting. So yeah, there's a definitive gap there. There's still a definitive gap there. I don't know if it ever made me feel self-conscious about my own recovery, but I also understood pretty early on that compartmentalizing what my own experience was, because school's not a very spiritual activity. So, no matter how meditative you may be, it's not going to get your homework done. And so there's a tremendous amount of like personal will involved in education. So
just put your head down and do the work, right?
Yeah. So for me in early recovery, that was probably a bit of a challenge. And I really had to compartmentalize my recovery in different ways and learn how to kind of foreground and background whatever my own experience was according to kind of the settings and also, not being afraid to identify myself as someone in recovery and to be able to, raise my hand in class and be like, well, in my experience, this doesn't really work or whatever, and to feel empowered to do that. So yeah, I mean, there were some challenges there, but it also helped me to learn how to speak the language of academics and science. And so
on. Almost like to serve as a bridge. Like I've got both of the experiences now. Like, almost like building like a bulletproof. Like you are unimpeachable from either side of things, right?
Yeah, it was really there's a real dearth of science done by people in recovery. Now that's changed in recent years because we've really put together a lot of effort in putting together a collaborative of people that are in recovery that are also studying recovery. But at the time, I mean, you'd read the DSM and it just tells you what it tells you, and there was a real lack of nuance, and so that really made me think about. I would take addiction studies class even in graduate school in my social work program. Um, my professor would look at me every now and then. He'd say, "Does that sound right to you?" And I'd say, "Well, some of it, So yeah, I mean, there was definitely some challenges there.
Okay. Right on. And so you're at Texas Tech, and you kind of finish up what you're doing. I guess first you finish your bachelor's, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you decide that you're going to continue to pursue academia. At what point does the recovery linguistics, the stigmatizing language, start to become kind of a focal point for you?
So that was after me and my co-author were both in graduate school at the same time, and I got a job right out of graduate school doing research without any publication. I didn't publish any papers, and I got this job doing research. So,
and typically it's the other way around. You publish, then you get to do research.
Yeah, I mean, typically you got to have some sort of record of research. But my collegiate recovery connections were really what got me that job. So,
Not what you know, it's who you know.
Yeah, so I got a job, basically introducing research into collegiate recovery program, and somewhere in there, in my master's degree, obviously I went through a transformative social work program, and we learned a lot about it. Was really heavy in theory, and so it was a lot of feminist theory, it was a lot of radical kind of Marxist theory. It was Foucault, it was Freud. So it was all of the things about power and language, the way we socially construct things. And so looking at recovery or looking at addiction or looking at how the science of recovery is done, it's really obvious when you have that kind of theoretical understanding how this stuff feeds into the ways that we conceptualize addiction and recovery and speak about it. And somewhere along the way, my co-author reached out to me, and that was one of the first things we got together on was language studies.
Awesome. So speaking of language studies, so you currently work at the Lerner Center for Public Health. What is that? Tell us about it.
Yeah, so Lerner Center is part of the Maxwell School for Citizenship and Public Affairs at Syracuse. The center itself is dedicated to population health and
just the broad, just all people.
Well, right. Special. So it'll be special population. So like the elderly, aging population, or people with substance use disorders, or it looks at the intersectionality between certain types of marginalization and health. And then we do policy analysis, we do research, we do independent research, national well-being studies, and advocacy and policy advisement. So it's dedicated to looking at systemic and structural causes of health problems. So we have two ways of looking at health. One of them is at the individual level, kind of in a capitalist society. We look at the individual and their pathology and whatever's going on in their life. And then you have the more upstream causes, which are things like political economy, housing, whatever racial or other forms of disparity there might be. And so Lerner Center,
educational disparity, access to healthy food deserts, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so we're really dedicated to looking at the upstream and systemic factors that are involved in health. My area is really in political economy and substance use, but I've looked at a lot of things. So I've looked at everything from right to work laws and riot control measures to substance use disorders and privatization.
God, this is also fascinating just because, a lot of the folks that we talk to are, positively impacting the world on an individual basis, right? Helping a specific type of substance use disorder individual get sober, right? Whether it be, someone who works with only women or someone who focuses on bringing athletics and, all these, like a special population within a special population. But what you're talking about is like influencing policy that can impact on a much wider scale, even though a little bit more divorced from the front line of the issue in a sense, right? How does that feel for you, being a guy who has been on both, right? You've been on the front lines, like sponsoring dudes and dragging guys out of trap houses to go to rehab, but now you're influencing policy in DC, right? So
yeah. Well, I mean, I think one of the things that is really clear, I think, in personal recovery is that it's not the substances, and it's not that I'm a morally flawed individual, right, or that I'm a bad person, and so extrapolating that into the larger kind of sphere, understanding that there are factors involved in how we conceptualize and pathologize various parts of health, mental health, and physical health that are due to structural factors. So just like how existential factors play into personal, that the existential factors for me had to be addressed in order for me to have sustainable recovery. So too do the systemic and structural factors have to be addressed in order to really make an impact on substance use disorders in a society.
Wow. Oh man, Jason, I don't know about you, but like the things that Austin is saying are really like
This is
fireworks in my brain.
I'm as like relaxed, as intrigued as if I'm listening to somebody with a mustache. This is like really, really. I'm like transfixed. This is great.
Oh my God.
So do you still work like personally, like a 12-step program or anything like that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was sponsoring a guy last year, and going to local meetings. COVID put a damper on some of that, but I've checked out some stuff online.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I still prescribe to the idea that every day I have to do something for my recovery. I have to stay connected to kind of what the truth based on my experience is, and and then I really focus. I think one of the things that we've really kind of looked at, that I've really kind of looked at as a professional and as a researcher, is the gap between kind of the ethics of 12-step life and the clinical sphere, the biomedical sphere, and how it's conceptualized in the research, and really trying to figure out how to take the ethical range of 12-step communities and the altruism that are kind of that's inherent in that, and really put that center stage in the biomedical discussions, because it's left out almost
unpack
entirely.
that for me. Unpack that for me. What did it say on Reddit? Explain it like I'm 5, because I think I understood what you just said. But like when you talk about the altruistic aspects of 12 steps and putting them into the biomedical model, right? What do you mean specifically with that?
Yeah, so we conceptualize recovery as some sort of, generally in the biomedical sphere, you conceptualize recovery as some reduction of pathology or symptoms, which doesn't really tell you anything about how well the person's doing. It just says that they use 30% less of a substance last month, or they've had X amount of days in abstinence.
Because that's what's measurable, right?
Right. It's measurable, observable, and this goes back to kind of behaviorism and psychology and all that. But the fact of the matter is that we know from personal experience that recovery is far more rich and involves a lot more than the substances itself.
Right.
The problem is removed for many of us, and that in and of itself has a lot of implications, because then it becomes a matter of how to live, and that reestablishment of principles within your one's lifestyle, and how to derive meaning out of life in a way that was not possible when you were using substances. That becomes the kind of framework that sustains recovery. And so things like service, for example, I mean, that goes back all the way to biblical times and even ancient times, as something that you can do to heal the the body and the mind. So these things are ancient, right? And yet you read a study from some biomedical research, and it says, X intervention gave us 30% reduction in the use of some substance. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like, okay, well, that's cool, but how are these people doing? And how are they living? And what does 30% mean? Is that a significant improvement for them, or is that just some stasis, or what is that? And
So
so bringing that into the components is really essential.
So that makes me think of something interesting. So we often, I have gotten very liberal in my views on recovery, right? I'm like, whatever works for you, if it makes your life better, go for it, right? And one of the areas that most comes up in conflict and in contentious discussions is the question of MAT, right? Things like Suboxone and supplicate, and right, all the data, right, shows that there is a reduction in use and death when you bring in those medications, right? And that's you can't argue with it, right? But honestly, I've never thought about like, okay, does a reduction in use automatically translate to an improved quality of life or a greater sense of purpose? So like what have you seen in relation to that, bringing those two frameworks together?
Yeah, so I mean, we live so, anybody who's done any clinical work knows that we work in a system that we try to boil an intervention down to its least, uh, its most broad aspects to effectuate the most generalizable results. And so, if I can give you a medication that reduces death at a time of crisis by like 50%, then that's a significant finding. But it doesn't.
Absolutely.
It doesn't necessarily tell you anything about recovery, right? So it doesn't. They're kind of different spheres, and we conflate them, or I would say that people outside of people outside of certain circles probably conflate them in a way that is inconvenient, which is the source of the tension. Um, I don't know if I think that whatever people do to get into recovery and whatever they access or whatever they have access to, if it improves their life, then we're talking about something that is moving towards um, some means of recovery. So we wrote a paper on the definition of recovery, and we really talked about it being um, a movement towards health, and that's really what we're talking about, a fundamental movement towards health. So I think that one of the terms that gets thrown around a lot is evidence based. So like quote unquote, medications are evidence based. Well, the 12 Steps is one of the most well studied social organizations. I mean, there's volumes of research on the efficacy of 12 Steps, but that doesn't get brought into the discussion because it doesn't have to validate itself the same way that something like medication does.
Well, what I hear is that, or kind of the narrative that I've been told, is that all the research done on 12-step recovery communities doesn't necessarily pass scientific muster because of the informal nature of the organization, the difference in experiences if you go to an AA meeting in New York or you go to an AA meeting in Kerrville, Texas. So, I mean, is that accurate when people say, like, yeah, I mean, it's data, but is it really good scientific data? Not so much. Like, what do you say to that?
Well, I would say that I mean, the efficacy for things like Suboxone is done through randomized controlled trials, and so you have the standard for you have a blind group and you have a treatment group, and you see the difference. But that's considered kind of the quote unquote gold standard. But it's not. But anybody who does research knows that that's only one type of research. It's generally it's good for some things, but it's not necessarily good for everything. And so the idea that we have to reduce the 12-step experience to something that's measurable in the same way that we measure medicine is kind of foolish. It's not necessarily the same thing. And so there are challenges with studying an anonymous group that is so regionally diverse and decentralized. Those are methodological challenges that don't necessarily have anything to do with scientific rigor per se. Now,
oh man, that is a great rebuttal. Oh man, awesome, so good. Sorry, continue.
Well, and at the same time, I mean, there are researchers that have dedicated their lives to trying to simulate the best version of like RCT studies within 12 steps, and they've published in like the Cochrane Review, and they show that at least for alcohol, the 12 steps is the most effective method. So, I mean that, and they did that through looking at 12-step facilitations, which they could reduce down to in the same way you would reduce like medication dose. And so,
okay, that's a point in the win column for Jason. All right.
now, do I think that that's the best way to study the 12 steps? I think that the what we've tried to do as recovery scientists is really introduce the idea that first you have to collect enough qualitative information about the recovery experience to begin to derive things that are meaningful constructs that you can then measure. So you mentioned Recovery Capital and Bill White. Bill White's kind of the godfather of recovery science.
He's the Bill Wilson of recovery science.
Yeah, and the idea of recovery capital is a measurable concept, and it's being used more and more often, both internationally and within the U.S. And there's some other, I mean, there's several other constructs that can be used, like self-esteem and quality of life, the WHO quality of life scale, and things like this. I work in kind of the area of theory, and so working on what are the individual factors that have to do with kind of transcending and getting into an emancipatory state, escaping kind of the clutches of whatever addiction one is suffering from, and what that means and how people view it. And so taking that information directly from what people say about their recovery and turning it into something you can measure, that's the real task before us.
Oh man, Austin, you're so fucking smart, bro. To think that there was a point in time where you said earlier, you were like, college was not a thing that was even in my radar. It was not on the table for me anymore. Like that's what a miracle of recovery, right? The recovery not only put that back on the table, but has you like deconstructing and analyzing recovery on a level that I've never even thought to consider.
You must have made some counselors' lives hell in your first couple times in treatment. Oh my God. I've been to treatment quite a few times, and there was always a couple guys like you who was just like, just so well read and can disprove everything, and is just gonna take this whole group to hell on like a technicality.
Yeah.
Did he just call you out on some rehab behaviors, Austin?
Yeah, and well, and they had to tell me that whatever I thought I knew, that the biggest challenge that I faced in rehab was getting over who I thought I was.
Yeah.
So I want to get into some of the language stuff, because I remember first being introduced to some of I guess what was the earliest non-stigmatizing language. There was that documentary that came out.
Greg Williams.
What was it called? Yeah, Greg Williams. What was it called? The first one.
Anonymous People.
Anonymous People. And that was the first time I heard someone say, my name is Joseph, and I'm a person in long-term recovery. And what that means for me is that I haven't, whatever their definition was. And I remember being in the rooms and being like, oh my God, like gag me. Like these people, I can't just say you're an alcoholic or addict. Now that was, that was a long time ago. I don't think like that anymore. But, why is there, I think a lot of people don't understand, right? Like we've said alcoholic and addict since the 40s, right? And those have been a marginalized group's terms to use for themselves, right? So why does it matter? Like why does it matter?
Well, one of the main things that spurred on kind of the discussion of stigma is the opioid crisis and the overdose crisis, and particularly the way the press was reporting um, you know, heroin addicts, right? Which is a really stigmatizing way to talk about somebody in the media. And but nobody had any tools. I mean, it's not like somebody outside who has no experience really knows what to call anybody. So if you're a journalist, writing for the Atlantic or something, like, you're not going to necessarily know how you should refer to this population. You're not going to know any history. They just didn't have any concept. And so there's always been a lot of stigma. The substance use disorder is worldwide the most stigmatized identity that anybody can have. So much so that in places like the Philippines, they round people up and kill them. So we're talking about something that is tied to a vast amount of violations and a vast amount of marginalization. So the depth of the stigma, I think most people are not aware of, and then they're not aware of how we came to conceptualize um, like drugs are bad. Okay, like people never really questioned that. But the fact of the matter is that we live in a Protestant society that is informed by the kind of quasi-religious notions that were the founding of the country. So this idea of like the body as a temple, so on and so forth. And so intoxication, substance use, any of this stuff was bound to attract a certain amount of stigma. And it wasn't considered a disease for a long time. And then even once it was considered a disease, there was nothing to do about it, right?
Yeah,
The
and it
doctor
was, and
couldn't
even
help
then,
you.
it was a disease, right? It was
Yeah,
like it's a metaphor. It's not really.
yeah. Yeah, and the idea that like the hospital still can't do anything for you, medical professionals still can't do much for you. I mean, I don't know where we got into the discussion where, I mean, most of recovery happens well outside of any sort of clinical sphere or environment, and it happens in people's daily lives. And so, um, how we talk about ourselves in and amongst informal groups of mutual aid became kind of the de facto way that people spoke about us, and that had to be challenged when it became kind of this media priority during the overdose crisis. And so we started with language looking at, because it's one thing for a culturally marginalized group to reclaim a pejorative label as an act of political empowerment, which is what we do in 12 steps. But it's another thing when you go and testify before Congress and you say, "Yeah, I'm an alcoholic." Well, that's going to register in people's minds in a negative
It's
way.
got some baggage to it, yeah.
Yeah, and so what may be empowering for me in certain church basements, right, or amongst my friends, is not seen that way by society. And there's a tremendous amount of stigma that still exists in society. A lot of people don't even really know a lot of people are still in the illusion that it has to do with the substances or the person's character, right? And so really correcting that begins with language. And so our studies really focused on professionals and what are the terms that people use based on the existing research that have been tied to um, uh, forms of marginalization. So real early study looked at when nurses speak to another nurse, when a nurse speaks to another nurse and refers to a patient as a drug addict, that patient receives qualitatively poorer care, right? So it's these kind of
Just like
nuanced.
they're automatically bumped down the totem pole of priorities amongst all the other patients they may be seeing at the same time.
Yep. Yeah, and it doesn't matter what you went into the hospital for. If you're in the emergency room and you mention that you're someone who has a problem with substances, then all of a sudden your pain isn't taken seriously. All of a sudden your complaints aren't taken seriously. You're considered maybe a dishonest person, right? So there's all these things that come up in people's minds the minute they find out that you are a person who struggles with substances. And so,
So when you guys are advocating for this change in language, you're not necessarily saying, "Hey, you folks in 12 steps rooms, you got to stop calling yourselves alcoholics or addicts." It's more so when we're talking about things like the media, um, public facing discussions in professional settings that, because even in treatment, right, you got master's level therapists saying like, hey, Bobby, you're a heroin addict, so let's talk about that, as opposed to okay.
Yeah.
And that goes with, the traditions of 12-step in the first place,
Yep.
So this is saying like that, I'm an anonymous. This is where I talk about this, and once I leave this room, I don't identify like that.
Yeah.
Well, and another thing that's interesting in treatment is, I think, one of the things, me and Jason both work at Recovery Unplugged, and one of the things we really try to do is keep a really positive environment for the clients, right? Non-punitive. We try not to say no or punish clients for the behaviors that they're there to get help for, right?
Right.
And we still catch a lot of flack for that, because a lot of treatment centers and kind of the old school idea is that you should suffer a little bit, right? Like, suck it up, buttercup, you put yourself in rehab.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And this kind of seems to be like a parallel, right? Not only in behaviors and how we approach clients, but also in the language that we use.
Yeah, and it goes all the way from, you think about just kind of this tacit assumption that people should kind of suffer in detox to prison, right?
Yeah.
People go into jail and they've been using opioids for 15 years, and the jailers are like, well, that's just too bad for you.
Mm-hmm.
And you should know better than to be a junkie scumbag, and that's killed people. And so that entire element of where systems of care and discussions about substance use disorders in society, that all has to be professionalized. And so using clinical language, the APA was able to incorporate like how to talk about it in research. Journalist guides now include the right terms to use when you're referencing people with substance use disorders in your articles. So now there's a whole bunch of guidelines about how to talk about it, but it wasn't always like that. So
okay, so let's get some of this language out there. Let's play a little game. I'm gonna say a word, and you tell me the non-stigmatizing way to say that. Yeah.
Mhm.
Here, Jason, we'll take turns. All right. I'm gonna go first. Heroin addict.
Person with an opioid use disorder.
Jason.
A drunk.
Person with an alcohol use disorder.
Relapse.
Recurrence of use.
Oh, okay. So yeah, chronic relapse or okay. Go ahead again, Joseph. I'm just like this is very enlightening to me.
Well, is there a term for chronic relapser?
I would just say, no, because the term chronic, so chronic has some implications that are, chronic fails to offer the possibility of recovery.
Right. Untreatable.
Okay. Okay. So what about, that guy, he pissed dirty on his UA.
Yeah. I have a whole thing with UAs. So, I would say, I shouldn't be staring at people's urine anyway. But yeah, the term is like they had a dirty UA or whatever, and the correct way to say that would be that they were positive on some sort of panel of tests for some sort of substances. But yeah.
All right. So what about so Jason's an NA guy, right? So they use the term clean.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yep.
Is there some sort of, like when people say like, I'm 30 days clean, what is the non-stigmatizing response to that kind of language?
Well, the thing about clean is that it's a dichotomous. So what's the opposite of clean?
Dirty.
Yeah. And so like if you're not clean, then you must be dirty. And
but before I got clean, I was fucking dirty.
Yeah. But and which is like if you're talking if you're talking in a group, like
right,
a 12-step group, but like if a doctor says you're not clean, then that's stigmatizing. right? Because they're implying that you are dirty, and this is a professional who should know better, and be sensitive to the idea that this person suffers from a problem, and they are part of a marginalized population that is highly stigmatized.
I'm in 100% agreement here, which is, I came into seeing what we were going to be talking about. I thought I'd have a little bit more opposition, but like I was saying earlier, like this is what it talks about in 12 step. Like this is the place where you get to talk about this and you get to say these things, because you're not going to go to work and tell about, talk to people how like you robbed your mom to go down to get crack and stuff.
I mean, I talk about that at work.
Well, yeah, we're lucky, Joseph. We get to.
Yeah, but at the same time, when I refer to myself, like with my CA friends, as like a crackhead, right? Like what I'm implying is that I did all that stuff.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the truth about me at some point in my life. And look at where I'm at now. So the difference between myself homeless on the streets of Dallas and myself as a PhD researcher.
Right. So and that's the difference to like when you're at a meeting and there's a newcomer there, and this is why you qualify yourself and say, look, I might be put together now, but I am a crackhead. But then and that at the end of the meeting, now that's over, you go back to work and you talk about your substance use disorder.
Yep.
Yeah. Love it. Oh man, this is so good. Jason and I work in treatment. I'm a professional, and very often, like I switch between both nomenclatures depending on who my audience is and what I'm trying to kind of convene or what I'm presenting. But what do you think? Not everybody who listens to this show obviously is in the treatment industry or a professional of any kind that relates to substance use. So what do you think kind of the general public needs to know about, stigmatizing language? Folks maybe who are dealing with addiction within their homes, or their loved ones, or whatever it may be. Like, what does the general public need to know about this kind of stuff?
Well, I would say that there's some hard and fast rules that we already know as having exposure to mutual aid, which is like, it's okay for me to identify myself however I want, but it's not necessarily okay for you to call me whatever it is that I am.
Yeah.
And so that's important. It's important to give families the right language, especially if they're dealing with a family member. There's no shame like being someone who is deep in addiction. I mean, that is one of the most shameful states of being that you can possibly be in. And so teaching people not only the right language, but I think also framing it in the elements of compassion, right? Like, I understand your son is stealing from you or whatever, but let's try to look at him as someone who has a substance use disorder that is a treatable condition, and not necessarily something that requires tough love. Maybe the exact opposite would work, right? Maybe absolute and unconditional positive regard will work. And so I think opening people's minds, because the people that are like some of the hardest people to have these discussions with are the ones that have personal experience with like an abusive family member. So like their father, right? Who's an alcoholic, and they have a tremendous amount of stigma towards anybody who might be using substances.
Yeah.
And so teaching them that, hey, the proper language and how to talk about this. And then also, like, you need to take responsibility for your own personal biases, and recognize that that's part of it. So the general public really needs to understand that, I think when we talk about ourselves in public, we need to use the right language.
That's on us.
Yep.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the society is also responsible for how we socially construct substance use disorder. So the reason why it's a pathology is because society says it is. So that's on society. And the reason why it's criminalized is because the criminal justice system says it is. And so that's on the criminal justice system. And so we have to be able to articulate that, and at the same time say, under these contexts, when you talk about this marginalized population recognize that you are talking about someone who is marginal and not morally flawed, but marginalized by you and by this system. So those are the discussions that the general public needs to be aware of. That this stuff doesn't happen in a vacuum.
Yeah. Oh man, I feel like we could do a whole nother episode on the criminal justice system and like the inherent racism in the criminalization of alcohol and drugs in our country. But that is a conversation for another day. Oh man, we're quickly actually we're actually sort of over time, but I think it was
baby.
OT, yeah, we're in extra innings now. So I think it's time to start landing this crazy spaceship we're on. And the way we do that here is with rapid fire questions.
It's rapid fire question time.
Did you feel the testosterone in the room go up?
Yeah.
Awesome? All right, here we go. So just before we started, if the dogs would shut up. Okay. Just before we started, we were talking about, you being in Syracuse and being a Texas boy, and you missing Mexican food. So if we could magically teleport a plate of Mexican food from Texas to you right now in Syracuse, New York, what would it be and where would it be from?
It would be, probably tortas. Street level tortas from Monterrey, Mexico.
But like a fajita torta, barbacoa torta, milanesa torta, like what are we talking here?
I've always been a picadillo and milanesa are kind of my two things.
Yes,
I will put picadillo on anything. So whether it's a torta or a small taco, anything, I can do that.
Love it. Okay, what's your favorite Johnny Cash song?
Oh, I like them all. So, I can't.
Just name one.
I like The Man in Black.
Okay, there we go. All right. We're having to evacuate the planet. We are all making a 3-year journey to populate Mars, okay? And you have to spend those 3 years in an escape pod with one person who is alive today.
Tortas.
Who do you take?
Oh, sorry.
No, God, who do you take with you?
My Chihuahua. Mr. Shrimps. I take him everywhere. He's my best friend.
Okay. All right. Repopulation might go a little bit slower than hoped, but
All right. If Brene Brown and Gabor Mate were to get into a fight, who would you put money on?
I don't know. I would probably put my money on Brene Brown, but I don't think Mate would fight back. I think he would just sit there and look forlorn.
I'm really proud of that question, you guys. And then normally, last but not least, I only do one food-related question, but because it's you, I want to do two. If you were a flavor of ice cream, what would you consist of?
I would be the peanut butter, the chocolate chip cookie dough balls inside the peanut butter. So the very best part, the thing that you even approach ice cream for.
This guy's good.
Yeah, I mean, I'm telling you, he's real smart, man. He just got the right answer to that question. So anyway, Austin, thank you so much for being here, man. It's been great getting to catch up a little bit and hear some views some ideas that have challenged some of my views and expanded some of my views and helped give me some language for some of the things that I talk about in much less eloquent ways than you do. I know it's been super beneficial for our viewers. So thank you for coming out and spending the time. Thank you to all our viewers. Make sure to like, follow, and share. We're on all the major podcast platforms. We post every Friday morning. And, here's last words, Austin, before we wrap it up.
Yeah, I would just say that we should probably be a little bit more cognizant about how we treat people.
God, it's so simple, but
Right?
it sounds so profound when you say it. You know? Well, thank you again to my co-host Jason. Thank you to Behind the Scenes Greg's. If you want to know more about Austin Brown and the work that he does, you can find him on Twitter at recovery_A Brown, and you can also find him on Google Scholar by searching him by his full name, Austin McNeil Brown. Until next time, as we like to say here on Talksicology, there's 1,000 ways in and 1,000 ways out, and we hope you find yours.